you have to overcome that fear of the what if this doesn't work? What if I can't raise the money? What if I leave my job and this doesn't work out? We moved to Hong Kong 6 months later to start the business, which again was very much like, yeah, why not? Cool. What could possibly go wrong? We had to borrow money from friends to actually put a production order through. Borrowing money was the very last thing. We didn't do that first. So we were like trying to sell denim to our friends, and we did this like photo shoot. We made these flyers to hand out on the streets of Hong Kong for people to buy denim, these jeans. Starting's the easy bit. It's the hustle after that you put something out into the market and you're like, oh shit, yeah, now I have to sell it. And that's hard. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, we'll golden, baby girl, we'll golden. They're about to see us shine, 'cause we're golden. They can't ever break us down, 'cause we're golden. They're about to see us glow, 'cause we're golden. Yeah, we're golden.
Guys, just before we get started, if you're loving the podcast, can you please go leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, and please make sure that you subscribe on whatever channel that you listen to us on. It helps us out dramatically.
Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Kyle. Nice to be on. Nice to be here.
I'm really excited to chat to you today. I think, as we spoke about previously, I've always spent a bit of time diving in and doing a lot of research and looking at, your journey and kind of where your knowledge lies. And I think what I'm excited to chat to you about today is probably your experiences in business, but then your perspective shifts that you've had along the journey. And
yes,
because I think, we were just talking off air about it, but you get kind of told this story when you get into business, and that story can serve you really well. Yeah, but it can also cause demons and battles that you have to be able to have. And we were kind of talking about spirituality, but not woo and so on. But so really excited to chat.
I know. I can't wait.
We might start off with the startup story.
Yes.
So
okay.
I'd love to dive in and get an understanding of how Triangl started and basically how it all came about.
Yeah. So I was 27 when we started Triangl. So my background was a bit of e-com. It was a new space though. It was like a luxury to have an online store. It wasn't a necessity. So I'd been retail and then e-com, and then I met my co-founder Craig in 2011. And we kind of came up with the idea of Triangl and our second date. The reason being is that I tried to find a bikini for our second date and I couldn't find one. And I was always into fashion and style, and so was Craig. We were both very fashion obsessed kind of people. And I ended up telling him that story, that I couldn't find a bikini that was sitting between a surf brand, which is, sort of $50, $60, Roxy Billabong. They kind of owned like all the surf shops back then, which were all in the shopping malls. And they were okay, but they weren't like cool. They were actually okay styles of bikinis, but they were labelled with like Roxy or Billabong. And then there was the higher level, which was Zimmerman, and above that, Sea Folly were around, and they were about $150, $160. So there was nothing in between that was sort of sitting in that sweet spot of under $100, but more so in that fashion sweet spot of not being, Zimmerman was like it was a luxury brand in Australia, and it still kind of is. So it was totally unattainable for a girl in their 20s that had, living paycheck to paycheck. So that was the in-between. There was a gap in the market, which is one of my favorite sayings. There's so many gaps in the market. And on that second date, we just kind of spoke about it. And Craig he was like the true entrepreneur of, let's do a swimwear business. And I'm 27, who's always dreamt of doing my own thing and dreamt of having a business, and always felt like I wanted something special in my life. And I was kind of like, well, yeah, why not? He's 10 years older than me. He'd been through it. He'd already had a business. So I knew that he would kind of take the reins at the start and take me under his wing, which he did. Although it ended up being that we moved to Hong Kong 6 months later to start the business, which again was very much like, yeah, why not? Cool. What could possibly go wrong? We moved there. We sold everything we had, which wasn't much. We moved there. Had to hustle for a good 6 months to even, live. Craig had a little job that he took to bring in a little bit of cash. We kept the ideas of Triangl kind of going, but we had to borrow money from friends to actually put a production order through. And we kind of had this point sort of like a couple of months before we actually launched the brand of going, we either borrow money to go home because we couldn't even afford to fly back home. We either borrow money to go home, or we borrow money to actually have a crack and start this business. So we did, and I guess, from the outside it was an overnight success, and it was really quick. It was pretty much successful-ish from day one in the sense of there was always growth. We started with nylon spandex, we started with that fashion $79 bikini, and then quickly moved into our neoprene, which was our kind of what put us on the map for a lot of different reasons. It looked amazing. It was really quite easy to showcase through social media, which is our platform we were using. And it actually felt amazing on and looked different to anything that had been out in the market. So we had a few things go our way very early on. And we knew, I remember that feeling, and it's like we just knew when we had the neoprene that was a hook. Nylon spandex before that wasn't. It was lovely, and it would have done well, and it would have found its place, and it would have been all like la-di-da and just continued. But the neoprene had that magic something. It had that point of difference. That combined with social media and everyone now digesting all these brands and products and images online was just like the perfect combination.
I'm interested in your perspective now.
Yeah.
Because I think every entrepreneur, or more importantly, anyone who's thinking about starting a business is going to go through that period of time where it's a transition either away from a job that you currently have, or it's getting your product off the ground somehow with no money or no investment, or you've got this idea.
Yeah.
Like, what's your perspective now looking back at what you guys did? Because like you would look back now and go, wow.
Yes.
Like, what's your perspective now on that? And what advice can you give to people in that position where it's like, okay, I've got this idea, or maybe the idea is, semi off the ground, and we're at that point where we need to find some way to invest or, to get this off the ground, or the idea.
Yeah. Look, we went all in. And so it was very much having to overcome fear of going, I can't, like, you can't, it's like that. Matthew McConaughey's been saying this, like, you can't half-ass it. I keep saying that on Instagram. You can't half-ass things. And it's the same with launching a business. You have to risk it. You have to overcome that fear of the what if this doesn't work? What if I can't raise the money? What if I leave my job and this doesn't work out, and then I'm stuck nowhere? And it's like, well, what if? Like, what's the worst that could happen? Now, that's different risk. Yeah, it's like a different risk factor for different people. I've met women and men that have a lot more to risk. They've got a mortgage, they've got a family. So that's like a higher, you have to but if you're young, I was 27. So my risk was pretty low. I didn't own a car. I didn't own a house. I didn't have children. I had a career that was getting a lot of traction and I was going to be successful in it, but there was a ceiling to that. This potential of what may be was more attractive to me than what was going to happen if my life just continued the way that it was. And that was just like, it was like that, like, what if can be like framed negatively and it can be framed positively. Like, what if? And that was what I just held true. Like, what if, moving to Hong Kong was actually, as scary as it sounds, was the best thing, because it was taking ourselves away from every limiting belief that we kind of had in the sense of people around us, or we probably would have kept our jobs and just tried to start Triangl on the side. But when we moved to Hong Kong and we gave it all away, we had no choice other than to succeed. We had no choice other than to actually go forth and do it. And we had no distractions around us. So I know not everyone can like move overseas to do what they're doing, but that was kind of, we limited the distractions and we went all in. And that really, you can't, looking back, that it's just going like, it's framing the what if in a positive way. That was really what we did.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I've been lucky enough to obviously talk to a lot of business owners and have done so myself as well. But just how much the will to get something off the ground plays in it actually getting off the ground, and your ability to think outside the square.
Yes.
Like you guys borrowed money, and I'm sure there's probably another, 5 or 6 stories of, the early days where you're like, okay, I don't know how we did this, but we did it somehow, right?
Yes.
But I think it's like, the ability for you to get something off the ground is like, okay, you just have to think outside the square and just be really great at getting it done.
Yes, yeah, and you have to be really, you have to park your ego, and you have to do things that, for us it was when we were trying to make, so borrowing money was the very last thing. We didn't do that first. We were trying to find other ways to, you know, Craig had this old denim collaboration that he'd done with a blogger that fell through. So he had all this denim. So we were like trying to sell denim to our friends, and we did this like photo shoot, and we were like handing out. I actually didn't do this. Craig did. I refused. This is where I was like, I can't. This is like I cannot do this. We were like, we made these flyers to hand out on the streets of Hong Kong for people to buy denim, these jeans, like. That was, I went out to do it, and I actually could, it was so, that was my bottom of like, I can't do this. It was too much. But he did it only for an hour. I didn't sell any jeans. So it wasn't like, but it was those exercises of, I was reaching out to everyone we knew saying, hey, can you buy denim? Hey, can you do this? And again, even when we launched Triangl, it was the same thing. It was going, do you guys want to buy this? I'll give you a discounted rate. Like this is our swimwear. Like things that, you know, when you, especially people that have left maybe a successful career to start a business, and so you come in and you know, you're leaving something that you kind of got authority in, and you're a bit of maybe a leader, or you're getting there, and then suddenly you have to go back to the bottom because you're like an entrepreneur and you have a startup, and that's really challenging for people to actually admit that they're at the very bottom again, and overcoming that and going, you have to like eat humble pie and be like, oh, can you, like, you know, you have to. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, because their ego says, no, I'm this is going to be good because I'm good. And you actually have to go right back down the bottom of the little pecking list to build yourself up again. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. You know, they want to have like a launch party and like ego, and it's like, and that's fun and it's good. But at the end of the day, like, you're spending what, 10 grand having a launch party? Could you not have put that 10 grand into something to appeal to your customer that's going to be more helpful? But their ego is like, I want to look cool. I want to look like I'm just I'm like jumping over from successful career to successful entrepreneur. And it's like, no, it's successful career often to very, very bottom of the pile entrepreneur. And a lot of people find it hard to do that.
It's such a great point, because I often, like, it's almost like if you start a business that you can get like a lot of people saying, oh mate, congratulations, like you're doing so well. Yeah. And like, you've got to overcome that and say, no, success is not starting a business.
Yes.
Like that's the very beginning.
That's the easy
right?
bit.
Like that's the, you know, like, okay, I made the decision to start.
Yes.
It's like, you know, it can take sometimes 2 to 3 years just to get any traction whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. Like starting's the easy bit. It's the hustle after that, you know, you put something out into the market and you're like, oh shit, yeah, now I have to sell it. And that's hard. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's slow. It's not, you know, yes, there's like Triangl's an overnight success, and there are those stories, and that's the thing. Those stories are paraded around like that's the rule, but they're the exception to the rule.
Yeah, literally.
It's usually a slow and steady wins the race kind of thing.
Literally.
Yeah.
What would you say in the early days were some of the challenges that you had to overcome, both personally and on the business front, you know, to get it off the ground? Like, what would you say, you know, maybe the 2 or 3 largest challenges were, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I feel like everything was a challenge. I'd never had a business, so it was having to apply all I'd learned, which you know wasn't much and was much, into a totally new package, and working out what I was good at really quickly. I was very fortunate that I'd always worked in customer-facing roles and retail and marketing, and I always and I love the psychology of the customer. So having that that was really helpful for me. But then as the business scaled, and this was a really big challenge for me, and was probably when things started to kind of go pear for me, was the business scaled and I wasn't able to nurture customers in that one-on-one way that I was. And so I started to kind of like struggle a lot mentally during that process, because I was getting rid of what I loved so much. I feel like as founders and entrepreneurs, it's when the business starts scaling, it's really quite challenging to level up as a person as well, especially when a successful business usually means that your skill sets have suddenly, like, you kind of have been outgrown by the business, which is what happened with Triangl very early on. It was like, oh, this is actually doing very, very well. And it was still just Craig and I coming up with everything ourselves. And it was really isolating, and you don't want to tell anyone that you're potentially not doing that well in terms of managing it, because everyone's from the outside looking in going, they're killing it. And you're like, yeah, but I'm starting to feel like I'm getting outgrown here. So for me, that was a huge challenge, and something that I, looking back, had, you know, wished that perhaps I'd gotten a mentor or done some like upskilling myself of moving into a real management role as opposed to where it was like grassroots, me and the customer, nurturing that connection, nurturing that relationship. That was my biggest challenge. And that happened quite early on because I moved from this beautiful like customers and like I'm talking to everyone to then having to bring on someone else, training them. And then I moved into this training, setting up management role, which was not what I loved, but more so because I didn't know what I was doing. And it just took the love out of it for me. So that was really, really challenging and something that I was not prepared for going into because I knew how to do a startup in the sense of I knew what to do based on what I'd done. But then once I had to level up, I had no idea how to do that within my own business. Like I had no idea. So that was like the number one challenging thing that I remember.
So in the early days, were there one or two things that you think really fueled the success of Triangl? You know, you talked about before, like product market fit.
Yes.
In the terms of, you know, finding a gap in the market.
Yeah.
You know, and then was there anything beyond that, you know, in the early days, like maybe influencer marketing or something like that, that kind of really helped grow the business?
Yeah, there are a few things, you know, and I think it's like a perfect storm. You have to have, things will accelerate you to a certain point, but everything that so for example, Craig was so focused on getting the highest quality bikini for the lowest cost, like obsessive about it. We would go to the fabric markets and source the fabric ourselves and never used agents, and that was to save money, and we would get the fabric and feel it, and then he would negotiate with his limited, you know, they were English and Mandarin, and it was, you know, and then we'd get the price down, and then we would take the fabric ourselves to our factory, and every bit of that bikini was so carefully made by him. That was one thing that the customer was obsessed with, the quality for the price. They'd get this bikini and it would come in the right packaging, and they would just be like, this is so much more than it should. Like, how was this $79? Like, this is insane. So that was the number one. Number two, I'm so customer centric in how I approach life. Like I always have been. It's just who I am. Applying that to my business, of nurturing every single customer like they were the one and only customer, was so beneficial for me and for them. And then we got to use word of mouth marketing in that sense of I'd built this relationship, and then the product came and it was so incredible. Those were kind of our two main things. And then we were very, very fortunate to have Instagram and social media and influencer marketing accelerate our growth. You know, a lot of people tend to just say they were so fortunate they got in when Instagram was growing and like lucky. But what we had would have worked no matter what, with or without Instagram, because we'd worked so hard on our two different skill sets. Instagram accelerated us to be an overnight success, but with what we had, we always would have been, I believe, a success. It just would have maybe taken a bit longer. But definitely Instagram was becoming known for businesses when we were launching. So we jumped on that wave and were able to get traction, but without the nurturing of the customer that I did, and without the product being just as good in real life as it was on Instagram, we kept the flow going with everything. Like every touch point was absolutely like crossed off, and that's really why it was like a perfect storm of those things.
What are some examples of that, of the customer nurturing, you know, in terms of,
yeah,
because I could imagine, you know, in the early days, that's like I could imagine it would just be literally conversations that you had.
It was every, you know, when a customer, especially in early days, we weren't getting many orders. It was one every couple of days, and then two every couple of days, and then three, and then four. So I would email everyone when a bikini was sent, and not everyone, but it was an organic relationship. It wasn't me just reaching out going, how did your bikini go? Because that's weird. It's like cold calling. It's annoying.
Yeah.
But if someone had interacted with me, whether it was a comment on Instagram, there were no DMs back then, so it was an easier platform to manage in that sense. But I would write back to every comment. I would follow up with an email. If someone wanted something by a certain date, which was really big back then because online was still kind of new, so people would be like, I want this for this date, because everyone back then was shopping for reasons, for like a vacation or this. So they were always wanting things by a date. So it was a lot of shipping questions, and then I would build that relationship based off that. So I would be able to then go, hey, did you get your bikini in time? How was it? What was the fit like? Did you love it? et cetera, you know, and I just built that ongoing because I really cared. I cared what they thought. We were a new business. We weren't getting many sales. They were all we had to kind of get feedback from. So nurturing that ongoing and going the extra mile, you know, when a customer wanted something by a certain date, I would say, you know, I do this quite often. I'd say, where are you going on holiday? And they're like, oh, I'm going here. And so then I would look up the address of their hotel and then find out with DHL or whoever, we were using Hong Kong Post back then, and say, I can't get it to you in time in Melbourne or in Sydney, but I can get it to your hotel there. And so building those little touch points of me actually caring, and then this experience of this person getting a bikini on their holiday, and that feels like a present because it goes to the front desk, it gets left in their room, or it's at the front desk, and they're like, it feels like a present. And it just created this amazing flow-on effect of people then so excited, and they'd text their friend or whatever and say, oh my God, Triangl sent me this bikini here because it wasn't going to get in time. And that was me because no one would ever ask that of a brand and say, could you send it to my hotel? But for me, I would always say, I can send it there. And I used to do that all the time. And if something didn't arrive in time, I would send another pair to the hotel, and then they'd keep the pair that it was at home, and they'd have 2 pairs. And then it was just like, we really put a lot into nurturing those organic relationships early. And it worked because groups of girls would then be buying Triangl, and they'd be telling their friends, and because it's, as much as people talk about negative experiences more, it's more natural to do so. If you work that hard to get a positive story shared, people will share it more with more like emphasis because it's so rare. It's still so rare to have that experience. But every startup could adopt that mentality because you've got time. When you're a startup, you're not launching and like selling thousands of products. You have time to talk to every customer.
Yeah, well, you know, your first customer, your second customer, that's a real thing for every company.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what does that person say about their experience with your brand? Not necessarily just the product. Like you can have a great product. You know, it's the classic branding. You know, you could have the best meal, the best tasting meal you've ever had in a restaurant that smells like sewerage, and you'll absolutely never go back.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so tried and tested and true, and yet people just do forget. You know, you start a business and then you get stuck in doing things a certain way, and there's so much noise. And I see people that are outsourcing their fulfillment with a startup. They're outsourcing their fulfillment. It's like, what are you getting? One order? Really? You can't do that from your room at home? Do you not have a corner of your room you could put your stock in? Like, firstly, save the money. Secondly, get to know where your orders are going. Pack them yourself. Like, feel that and nurture that, because if you let go of those things before you need to let go of them, you'll never be across everything, and you'll never then know when something doesn't feel right or when something actually feels really good and you need to go with that, you know? But people just do it. You start a business and you get told, like, let's do this, and they've done that, and they did fulfillment, and they did this, and there's a lot of noise, but it's really just like starting very customer-centric and very lean as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
How did you think about the marketing side of things then? So obviously, in the early days, you kind of do what you can, and you're getting that feel of the brand.
Yeah.
When was there a point in time where you kind of said, I kind of truly understand what we're trying to do here and the messaging we're trying to get out? And I know that you mentioned, we kind of briefly spoke about influencer marketing.
Yes.
But how were you thinking about it then, and how do you think about it now?
Yeah, I mean, back then it was very much just what I knew to do, which was create connection. And then quite quickly we started to realise that we were building a bit of a community. And so I'm very big on teaching people to, and organically and with the right intention, is to build a community, not a brand. Because people want to feel connection to your business and your brand and your offering and you and everything that you're doing. So when we realised that this influencer marketing was kind of for us building this like Triangl Girls. And we were finding, so when we gifted and when we sent out, influencer and targeted women and girls, it was not just anyone. It was women that we felt actually would really they would buy a Triangl bikini. So I spent hours and hours and hours trawling the internet and Instagram and finding girls that I felt like would wear Triangl. There were girls that were specific girl. It was a girl that was wearing bikinis, but wearing bikinis in a fashionable way, not like a sexy bikini girl. Because back then it was still, you know, there was still that real like men's health magazines, and it was like girls on the front. It was still that era. Like it was, you know, so there were so many of those women early days on Instagram, but we were going after the more fashionable girl, like cool kind of girl. So it was a real finding the right match and then nurturing that relationship, and then realizing that that was a group of, so when we, because there weren't that many girls that fit that category either, so we kind of by default would just sort of keep re-gifting those few girls that were great billboards for us, and then they became our Triangl girls, and then that community grew and is still used today in the business, and a lot of other people adopted that sort of approach of building this community of women that or anyone that buy into your brand. So it switched into community building pretty quickly.
Was that insight something, so we just talked about your dedication in the early days to the customer and the customer experience and communication. Was that something that you picked up where you're like, okay, there's a certain type of customer that we know is going to buy this? Like what was that insight where you're like, okay, there's a particular type of person who's going to wear this? Because I find that, you know, now even with what we're doing is like there's certain customers that I know or certain brands I know, you know, we're B2B, where I go, yep, they're going to buy. You know, I know that they're the ultimate fit, and then there's others where I'm like, oh, they're probably not the greatest fit, you know. So what's that insight?
Yeah, we definitely went after a specific girl that was that fashion bikini girl, for sure, and we really pushed that and made the swimwear that we wanted from the very beginning. We wanted to be cool but not unattainable. So we didn't want to be, because there's always those brands that are cool, like a cool brand. Not as much anymore actually, because I think social media changed that and made brands need to be accessible to everybody, and the landscape's just changed. But back then there were those brands that were just so cool, and like you'd go into a store maybe even, and like the staff would be really almost rude, but it was the whole experience. We didn't want to be that. So we wanted to be fashionable and cool, but very attainable and approachable. So we had that real, in our head, that was our target customer, because it's just like we didn't want the cool girls, because the cool, like it's just like they're not the nice girls. Like we wanted to build a community of people that were friendly and open and connected and wanted to believe in what we were doing and know like kind of like who, like what we were about, and not who we were, because Craig and I were never front facing in the brand at all, but to feel like Triangl was a safe place. And that was quite clearly set up from the start, because it's what we felt was right and what we felt comfortable with. And it was kind of like who I was. Like I liked fashion and style, but I loved being a nice person. Like I wasn't walking around putting nice clothes on, and obviously I couldn't afford anything nice back then, but I was so obsessed with how I looked style-wise. But I wasn't doing that to then be like I think I'm cool now. You know, like for example, you know when you go you go to the club when you're younger and you're in the bathroom and it's girls and there's a cool girl wearing something and you're like, oh my God, I love that. And she's like, thanks. And you're like, like, where'd you get it? And she's like, what, she won't tell you? That's like the cool mean girl. Whereas I was the girl that would not only tell you where I got it from, but I would like show you the link to the product in the bag. This is it, and I got it in this, and I also have this, and maybe you should get this. Like I was that, and that was our Triangl customer. Yeah. It was the girl that still wanted to look good and feel good, but that was just not a mean girl, you know?
Yeah. And so creating community then, because I feel like that is such a nuanced skill set. Yes. Right? Like it's like, you know, a lot of people stumble on it by chance, but it sounds like you guys were pretty certain on that from the early days.
Yes.
What are the keys to building community? Like if someone's sitting here now listening to this and they're like, I really want to build a community too. Yes. Is there a few things or like principles that you kind of look at and go, yeah, like this is kind of the playbook? Yeah.
I mean, at the core of it, what's applicable now that we did back then was being the customer centric and being dictated by what your customer wants and listening to it whilst also standing with authority. So building the community for us came naturally in that way of we were telling them this is what we've got and this is for you, but we were nurturing them in a customer-centric way. And it was simpler back then in the sense of you didn't really have to have too much of a story. You just had to be very like, you know, building a community happened through the fact that we were so available to them online. You know, back then online stores weren't manned. Their emails took days to reply to. You know, we launched live chat a few months in, 24/7, like around the clock.
Yeah, wow.
for that reason, because we wanted to not be like an empty storefront. We wanted to be, and the community built organically through that, because they would come online and they would ask about the sizing, and then they'd come back again a day later and be like, I'm so sorry, but should I go the red or the blue or the pink? I don't know. Like, I got blonde hair and I'm this and I've got this and this, and it built the community that way, because it was like a community hall. It was like it was like a place for them to come to. What I think has shifted now in terms of community that I'm seeing that's really important is education. So we did that with the product, but people now want to know the story. And so you've got to educate and build a community through education and information. And going back from that, that means your intentions for your business have to be very aligned with what you're trying to do. Because people want to know the why, the how, the what. So building communities isn't just going, here's a product and here's a community. It's teaching whatever that is, the backstory to it, the why. Like, why did you actually why have you started selling this product? Why have you started this brand? And most people's stories are great. And so teaching that, the why and the how and the story, is how you build a community. And it will be a slow burn. People want to build communities quickly, and they're like, how do I build? Like, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you've got to start small. And some communities will go off and they'll be huge. And a lot of it's timing, depending on what product enters the market at what time, as to what community needs to be built. But you can always build it. It's like, I always hear of products and brands that are so successful and they have this community, and I'm like, I have never heard of them, because there's these, and that's fine. There's just different communities for different needs at different times, different levels. For me, I'm always dictated by, do I feel good in this? With Triangl, it was, do I feel every day, especially in that first year or two, I felt so good about that community. They were mine, I was theirs. It was always back and forth. It wasn't like a big forum where we all got together, but it felt like a community of women that were all, I was, nurturing every relationship in that way that it did feel community-led, but it wasn't, there were really no activations. It was still all online, but they were all following, they were commenting, they were tagging Triangl. It was a community, but it was a community. It was also a community without a reason and a base. Like, we weren't doing it to like then this or then that. It was just a community that was just nice. And so it is important to build a community, but I think a lot of people are trying to build communities for a reason now that might not be exactly why. Like, it's just nice to have a community and educate your customers through that, It's like kind of that simple.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I understand what you're saying, and I think a lot of it comes from that positioning, you talked about it as in, like, you were trying to position the product a certain way because it was your belief system. And I feel like even some of our conversations around TikTok before, I think what TikTok's done for brands is given people an authentic way to do what you were saying, which is the education, like you can see through it now, it's not just websites anymore where you go on a website and they've got this mission. Yeah. It's like, no, like, unless people can create this look and feel with content and they're seeing what you're really doing and what you really care about. Yeah. It's just so interesting, I think, how the landscape is changing. It's almost amplifying what you're saying, and you guys did it early on. You guys were doing it in the very early days of social media, whereas Instagram was very network driven, I feel. TikTok's like very, like content driven. You're not doing a lot of networking, you're doing a lot of watching, and that's how you interact with the brand now. So I think there's some great application from the principles that you're saying and what worked in the early days in the early days of Triangl and helped you grow the business to now, where it's like you're having to create that layer because that's how people interact with your brand.
Yes, and that's why it's so important, and more important than ever, for a brand to really access every day what their why is and what their intention behind their brand is, because people want to know, and people will now feel like you have to start a brand for the right reasons and talk about those reasons honestly and with integrity and with the right intention, because you can't actually really grow that well without doing that now. Like, I always think if Triangl launched now, it would be different. It would have been a very different entry to the market, perhaps another distribution channel. Perhaps we were on TikTok, but we would have been on TikTok, and it just would have been very different, a very, very different way of doing it, but the same logic applies.
It's interesting. Like, I think like even if I was to, I mean, this is a little bit left of center, but like user generated content, like imagine what Triangl, I'm thinking, you know, this is my business brain going, but it's like what Triangl would have done with user generated content, you know, like I can see in your mind, you're like, you know, you can already imagine.
So good. It would have been like insane because we were building that community, and then they would have gone and been our mouthpiece for us and just been like, and it would have been great. And, you know, it's because we put the work into the product and we put the work into building the customer care out. It would have been great because it was all like everything was set up well. And we had an answer for everything, you know, like manufacturing in China. We were able to talk about why we did that. I mean, we lived in Hong Kong. So people often kind of like want to put a bit of a cross against that when you manufacture offshore, but it wasn't offshore for us because we lived there. So it was like we would have been able to answer all those questions because we set everything up in that way from the very, very start.
And it reiterates your point of all those really important things you did in the early days, like understanding the customer, getting the feedback. You know, focusing heavily on the product and trying to really understand what people want so that you can maneuver your way through. Because it's almost impossible to actually make those decisions. Like you guys got onto Instagram early because you seen it as an opportunity, and because you knew your customer, you were able to make the most out of it. And it's like, that's a really good lesson, I feel, for like founders.
Guys, if you're loving this episode, make sure to take a screenshot, give us a tag, or even take a photo if you're watching it. Help spread the love. It helps us out dramatically. I just wanted to take a little bit of your time to say thank you to our major sponsors, BizCover. They are powering the podcast currently. They are the reason we get to travel and have all the amazing guests on. But they're also a really amazing company. They're a business insurer that are insuring Australians all over the country and making sure that if something does go wrong in their business, it's not painful and it's not deadly. If you're an e-commerce business, having insurance is really, really important because anything that goes wrong with your product and you are liable, and with the way the economy is currently, and manufacturing and shipping and all of these things and potentially stock going missing, just having your business covered could save you a lot of pain. So if you're interested in getting a quote, it's super easy. It only takes, you know, you can get insured in under 10 minutes and there's no paperwork involved. Their link is in the show notes. Go check it out and get yourself a better deal.
What do you think people don't know about scaling a business that stops them in their tracks? You mentioned this before, you know, in terms of that was something that you personally struggled with. Like, what do you think that struggle is with people as they grow?
I feel like a lot of it is a bit of imposter syndrome, and people, you know, when you start a business, you do have your why and you have your intentions and your reason, and then you get so caught up in the day-to-day because there's a lot to do, especially if you start to actually have some success. There's a lot to do. You have to hire people, you have to manage the operations, the logistics, the finance, the everything, you know, and people kind of forget to prioritize their why in their day, or think about it, or come back to it, or reflect on it. And someone will say, oh, you've experienced this growth in this area, so you should do this and you should do that. And so you're so like peppered with all this information and noise. And then you also have this kind of feeling of like you're still sort of back at this, you're just an entrepreneur with a startup. And it is a bit of imposter syndrome. For me, it definitely was. You know, the most asked question I get is, how do I scale? Like, how do I scale? How do I grow? How do I scale? And people just get stuck. They get to this point of, usually it's like straight after launch too, and they're like, what do I do now? Or they say, I'm at this point and I'm 2 years in and I've had success with this. And it's often that they've had success with something that was different to what they thought it was going to be. Like, I brought out 4 products. I've actually had a lot of success with this product, and now I don't know how to level up or get into that space now, and what do I do? And I think people just kind of, a lot of it's just like sitting back down and accessing kind of why you're doing this and your intentions. And we were faced with that a lot over, mainly the one that I'm thinking of the most is when we were having the private equity, and the questions that we asked ourselves were, you know, why did we start the business? And for us, it was freedom, because we wanted freedom. And so we were like, if we sell part of the business, we lose some of our freedom. And that was the biggest reason. We didn't start Triangl for, you know, money. We didn't start Triangl to be like well-known entrepreneurs. We didn't, you know, we started Triangl because we wanted to work for ourselves. We wanted a product that was going to make people feel good and look good, and we wanted the freedom. Like that's like our selfish reason for starting it, but it was that. So when we had those in our mind of like what we valued and what our what our beliefs were within what we wanted the business to be. I think a lot of people forget to even start when they just don't honor that from the get-go, and they forget because they get caught up. And I think a lot of that, how do I scale, is kind of going like how do I move forward, because I'm scared. I don't know what to do. And a lot, it's like, well, you do know what to do because you do know what to do because you got to go back and ask yourself those few questions at the start, like, why am I here? Like, is it the freedom? Is it because I wanted this? Is it because, some people start a business because they say in 3 years I want to be bought out by blah, and I want to go into this retail, or I want this, and they have like a plan. And those people, usually that plan doesn't work out, but at least they kind of know where to go so they can shift. But if you start with something and you're just kind of like, I'm just going to see how it goes, that can actually be really detrimental if you don't have your reasons at the start. Because when you start with that mentality of like, oh, I'm just going to see, and then you have success, you're like, shit, I didn't think this was going to happen. I don't know what to do. So, it's like there's a million resources out there that you can read, so many, and listen to and digest more than ever. And I think that's also confusing, is that there's so much now. No one knows where and what and how and why, like what to listen to. But it is then in those moments of like accessing why you started this and sitting with that. And some people might go, you know what? Entrepreneurship's actually not really for me. I don't know if I like this. Or they might go, oh, that's why I started it. It's because I really want, and that was my mission, and that's my messaging, and I'm just gonna go, and then it'll shift things. But people feel like they have to, if their business starts to scale or grow, they feel like they have to really quickly step up there with it, which then creates a disconnect with how they actually feel about themselves, which is not this successful entrepreneur. They're still back at the startup person going, I don't know what to do. And so it's kind of just like finding a way to get them to marry, which is why I'm so passionate about teaching the mental health side, because that helps you unlock that a lot easier when you know who you are.
Yeah, well, I'd love to touch on that now, because I think a lot of the research that I've done into yourself, obviously just preparing for this, was what I was reading was obviously a lot around that purpose, you know, and so later on in the business, I read that you lost a little bit of that, and I'm guessing that's kind of what you're touching on now.
Yes, yeah. I probably was that person that had the startup for fun, and we just wanted to work for ourselves, and that was our only goal, and that's fine, and that's lovely, because then you're not disappointed. But then it does, because that's fine to do if you have the mental health side of your core values and your beliefs and who you are kind of set in stone, which I didn't have. So then when the business started to really perform and succeed, and my identity was wrapped up in that business, and that business outgrew me, I outgrew me. And so I totally lost my sense of self, because I had no foundation to start with on who I was. Worked a million miles, 100 miles an hour, go, built this business. And then at the very, very top was thinking, I'm so miserable. It was, all these things were going on around me that were great, but I just didn't know where I sat. I had no foundation of how to deal with stress, how to deal with overwhelm, how to level up as a person. Once I lost that connection with customers that I was so passionate about, and that was such a small business mentality of loving that, I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't have any tools, anyone to talk to. And so it was super, super isolating, and killed, that's why I left the business at its peak. It was like a necessity. People keep talking about it at the moment, saying, it's so impressive you left, you knew to leave. And I was like, I didn't know to leave, I had to leave. I was so miserable. I actually felt that leaving Triangl would set me free. I remember that day so clearly. I exited the business. Craig and I had come up with an agreement. I finally said to him, I want out, because we'd been kind of both trying to work out how to make it work, because we'd personally separated a few months before. We were trying to really amicably navigate how to do it, how to leave, or he leave, or we do it together but separate. And I sat down eventually and said, I want out. And I felt like, this is it. I'm going to... And I remember we wrote the agreement down on a piece of paper of where the assets would be split, and it was quite straightforward, because Triangl was just two shareholders, Craig and I, and I was going to sell my share to him, and then I would get this in return, and it was all great. And it was in London, and it was at this terrible, dingy meeting room. I don't even remember how it was there. And I walked out to my hotel, and I sat on this street, and it was a beautiful day in March, really warm, and I just sat there, and I was like, I ordered a drink. I was sitting on my own, and I was like, now when do I start feeling free? and I didn't. I went into the worst year of my life because I had built my identity and my worth and my everything on Triangl because I didn't know who I was even at the start of Triangl. I'd never gone on any self-discovery development work. So when I exited Triangl, I was like literally an empty shell of a person. I was like, I don't know anything. And so I tried to like fill that with spending money, and like I can live wherever. And I entertained living in New York and Paris and London, and eventually went back home to Australia to start on a very intensive healing journey because I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through this on my own. It was just from never doing the work on myself at all through the process or before.
What do you know now that you didn't know then?
That mental health is something that needs to be worked on, and it's very important to do from a very young age. And I felt because I always thought at 27 that I would just get to that when I got older. You know, I always thought that's something for my 30s, like maybe a bit of self-development or whatever mental health. I just didn't think at 27 it was anything I ever had to worry about, and perhaps it wasn't. But when you get thrown into a business and putting yourself on the line and doing things that are totally new and foreign and then having to step up into that role, that was completely, you know, completely, going back, I'm like, oops, that was but I didn't know. Like I didn't know. And so now looking back, it's like and it didn't have to be, you know, I went heavily into spirituality because I was so broken back then. I wanted to give myself to that way. I wanted to it's like my faith. I was like, I need to give myself to the universe to say, can you tell me what to do next? I needed that. But, you know, it could have been anything else. It could have been psychology or like a psychiatrist or a therapist, you know. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. If I'd started at the age of 27, it probably would have been a lot more gentle. But I just, looking back, it would have been so different if I'd had a foundation of who I was as a person, and those silly things that we hear about like triggers and patterns and programs, like they are real. It is conditioning of the human form. Like we are conditioned. Like it's just like, that's just the reality of it, how you want to apply that. To not understand what my conditioning was and know, even just to know that is that, and that I was going to be triggered or there was going to be a toxic this, or, you know, to not know that is no wonder it ended the way that it ended, because I was just had no idea. I was just like up there just flying around and hoping I landed at some point.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we go through these things in life. You know, it's the constant. I don't know if you've seen The Hero's Journey, but it's like a concept of, you know, having an idea or some type of revelation. Yeah. Going through, you know, pain, going through a rebirth, and then it's this constant cycle that we go through. But and I can look back and kind of think the same things. Yeah. But my next question would be, what advice do you have for founders and business owners, you know, that are in the thick of it? Because it sounds like, and I mean, look, anyone who's in business can attest to there's a lot of times where you put the business ahead of everything. Yes. And, you know, that's, you know, we all know
inevitable. That. Yeah.
What advice do you have for business owners that are in the thick of it right now? You know, because I'm sure if you could go back to your younger self, you would give that person advice, and what would that be?
Yeah, it would be to not hold it in and to find someone to talk to. If you're feeling like you're overwhelmed, if you're feeling, and overwhelmed has like, I sometimes feel very busy in my life now, and I feel like I've got a million things to do and I'm juggling this and I'm juggling that, but I never feel overwhelmed anymore. Like I don't feel overwhelmed. Overwhelmed is panic for me. Overwhelmed is I can't do this. Overwhelmed is like, how am I going to get through? And you kind of just want to like put your head in the sand and not do anything. If you feel overwhelmed in your day as a business owner, then you need to talk to someone. If you feel like you are feeling out of control with your emotions and you feel like you need to have some level of escapism at some point, then you need to talk to someone. being busy and having a lot to do and juggling and sometimes feeling a little bit out of balance with, I have a lot to do today and I won't be able to do that and I've missed this and I've missed that. That's okay. That's normal. When it affects you on a physical level of overwhelm, of anxiety, of really, really copious amounts of stress, that is not good. That is not normal. That is not healthy. That is not sustainable. That's when you need to talk to someone and get some help, because it is a long process to go and work on yourself. And a lot of people avoid it because they feel like it's too hard. And it is hard and it is challenging, but it's the only way, I feel, to have a successful business or get into one and sustain it and enjoy it. You know, because otherwise people, it's like you'll have this and you're like, oh no, it is good and I'm doing well and I'm this, and people outside are looking and going, you're doing so well, good for you, it's amazing, I'm so envious, I wish I did that. And you're in there going, oh, I'm like, yeah, it's like I actually am so stressed and overwhelmed, and it's so common. And since I started talking about this, the amount of founders that are in it saying, I feel the same, I'm going through that. What do I do? Do I have to leave my business to find myself? And I'm like, well, no, I was the extreme of that. And I went through that to now be able to hopefully share what I went through so people can stop before they get to that point, because you shouldn't feel overwhelmed. It's not a healthy feeling to feel overwhelmed. And where I'm at in my life now, and I'm busier than ever because I've got my 4 children and I'm starting my new business and there's a lot going on, but I'm never overwhelmed. I'm out of balance sometimes. Sometimes I'm a terrible mum because I'm not like those things fall out of balance. Sometimes I don't get any work done, but I never feel overwhelmed and I never feel stressed. And the moment that feeling comes in of those like feeling that, then I know I need to go and talk to someone or check on that or figure out why that is. And I listen and I slow down.
Can we go not deeper on that, but like what are those mechanisms? Because like I know we're saying talk to someone, but
yes,
you know, like is that?
I don't want to go too woo-woo. So
no. But is that, you know, like so? I know this feeling. Like sometimes you feel like you go, well, like who? You know what I mean? Because it's not everybody understands business, or you know, not everyone understands the pressure that comes with entrepreneurship. And you know, so for some people it might be therapy and so on. Like, is it? What are the kind of mechanisms that you found useful?
I mean, the first one for me that I did was a consistent exercise routine, and that taking that time for myself every morning to wake up, because you know we always like wake up and don't look at your phone, and it's like, no, we always kind of do. But that was that was my very first entry into mental health and how important it was to take care of my mind and my body in that way. So that, but a lot of people are probably going, oh well, I do that, I work out, it doesn't help. What I did when I was talking to someone, I had such a low self-belief at that point because I'd held in so much of how I was feeling, because with Triangl Success, everyone was saying how amazing my life was and dream life and you're incredible and you're this. And the shame I felt around that I wasn't feeling that was also perpetuating how sad I was internally. So it was like a double whammy. So I went really hard into spirituality. I did therapy, didn't find that it was enough. It was a lot of talking about my problems, which for a lot of people is absolutely more than enough. It's just another person to talk about in a shame-free space. I needed more of an understanding that this was happening for a reason. And that, because for me, what concerned me was I was thinking, if I don't have my passion and my purpose in Triangl, in a business that was making me millions of dollars, giving me all this success, everything I've ever wanted, I have the 2 children, if this isn't it, then like I thought I was broken. So I needed to go and see people that were like, no, this is actually how it's supposed to be. And I needed that encouragement of the more sort of spiritual healing modalities where they're telling you things like, you are special, you are amazing, you are here for a reason, you are great. And for me to start to believe that about myself again, I needed to be told that. And I didn't find that therapy and psychologists were telling me that. They were more like, yeah, you're a bit screwed up there. I needed to be told that, yes, I was off path, which is kind of the way they talk about about it more in those. It was more gentle. I needed gentle. I was so broken. I needed just a gentle way to come back to myself. And it took a really long time. Perhaps if I'd done something more aggressive in terms of therapy, I'd maybe have come around quicker. But I liked the gentle, slow process of feeling like I was a really special person and like really believing that, because it's gotten me to where I am today, which is actually going, oh, now I have passion, I have purpose. And like, I used to go to retreats and do things and they'd talk about that. And I'm like, nah, I definitely missed out on those at birth. Like, I don't have those. They don't exist for me. So yeah, so definitely more spiritual for me, but it's really just knowing what you need at the time. And the first step is finding, and it could be the wrong thing. See a therapist first. Go see a kinesiologist. Go do something other woo-woo. And if you hate it, then at least you tried it. You'll find the right thing for you at the time. That's what you're meant to do. It's just actually...
It will feel right.
Yes, taking the time to actually do it and acknowledge that this is not sustainable and I'm not my best self.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think like a lot of it, you mentioned it before, but like it sounds, and I know this is some I've experienced, but it's like a lot of it is just refinding purpose.
Yeah.
Story, narrative, I think it was about 6 months ago, we're obviously in a new business.
Yeah.
And it was one of the greatest exercises I did was actually draw the timeline of my life.
Ooh.
And the thing I found really interesting of it was kind of showing, it made you reflect on the situations that you were in where you had lost your purpose or you felt empty and what you had to do to regain that. And that inevitably whatever's in front of you and the present moment is really all that matters.
Yes.
And if you can find your purpose and find what is your driving factor. And I think the hardest thing about life is that it changes. Right? Like what my purpose was at 21.
It's not linear.
Is like, and you constantly go through these massive shifts in life and you constantly find these times where you're just like, holy fuck. Like, what am I doing this for?
Yes.
And so on. I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yes. Yeah. And as entrepreneurs as well and people that have businesses, you will not find the time for yourself. You like, I'm too busy to do that. And it's like, no, you just have to. Like, you have to. I've seen too many people that get to the point of breakdown and then they're like, and they always say the same thing, I wish I'd done that years earlier. I wish I knew that before. And it's like, we hear that. I mean, Diary of a CEO, every single interview, they have that moment of like, oh, I had this successful business and then I left that and then I went on the journey and I found out who I was and now I'm this and I meditate and that's it. And it's like, why then do people not do that at the start? If we're hearing that it keeps happening at the end, don't you think then we could be in a lot better a position if we all did it at the start before? Like, that's what I'm like, come on.
So what's next for you then?
Yeah. Well, it's doing this. I'm writing a book and I've got a podcast coming out and I've been mentoring and hosting workshops and working with founders, entrepreneurs, but anyone that feels like they have ambition and they don't want to lose themselves in that ambition. That's my biggest thing, because it is so easy to do. And if you are ambitious, you are going to fall out of balance at times. And if you want to have a business and scale it. So it's like, I'm teaching that, to do the work, which you have to do, it has to run in parallel with having ambition. It has to run in, you can't, like, we're not all fortunate enough to like sit into a 4-year healing journey like I did and just like live my life in that way of like, oh, I am at one with the universe. Yeah. Like, we can't all do that. But what we can do is our little bits to ensure that then when we do go through these excessive career-driven years and moments, and for women it's through the family piece and it's through all of these crazy things, we have a foundation to come back to of who we actually are and why we're actually here, which is like very far-flung. And every soul is meant to have a passion and a purpose, and that's like crazy woo-woo stuff, but everyone deserves to feel really good. I mean, the way I attach it is, if you have a business or you're in a business or you're working, you deserve to feel good at all times. Like, feel good, not do things that cultivate a feeling of good, of like going and having a wine with your friends or going and like buying clothes or going and doing those. They're the dopamine hits that we know are good and they're safe and they're easy. But to get the real constant feeling of feeling good, you have to do the work. Like, you have to put in that time. And the thing about healing and like healing from trauma that's so fun is that you start that journey and you don't just suddenly go on this linear like woohoo, like it's that you literally go in and go bang. You figure some shit out quickly that you need to work on, and that's not fun, but it's so worth it to get to a place where you're more calm, you're more grounded, you don't feel anxious, overwhelmed, stressed. And as business owners, it's our duty to not feel that way, because we usually have staff, or we at least have a customer that wants to buy from us, and they're going to buy from you more if they can feel that you feel good.
Yeah, and that best self.
Yeah.
Good things come to you when you are constantly, the more time you spend as that person.
Yes.
And with that feeling, like that is what inevitably I think business growth and these kind of things are about. And so, and then it's just, how do you navigate that through these constant shifts?
Exactly. It's that intangible. So it's like, it's intangible to like, you know, I can't say to you, there'll be a 50% growth in this or sales and revenue. I can't teach that, but I can teach you that I promise you, if you are aligned with your best version of yourself, which means having to get rid of things that don't serve you, which is really hard for people, especially stressed out business owners. Yeah. It's like you have to abandon that to get the very best from your customers and for your customers. And you know, like that, it's like, but I can't teach that with like numbers and figures. It's just like a feeling. It's like trust me. Trust me guys, it's worth it.
It's the foundation, right? It's got to be for you.
Yeah.
The last segment that we do is quickfire.
Oh, yes.
And so these questions are broad questions with great answers.
Okay.
So what's one piece of advice for your younger self?
Oh, do the work. Yeah, that's easy. Do the work. Yeah.
So do the work to you is what we've been talking about?
So self-development. The younger the better. Like go and work out a bit about who you are as young as possible. Understand who you are, because we're all different, we're all special, and go and do that before you get into a business that kills you.
And so doing the work is not just working hard.
It's not just working hard. Doing the work is development, personal development work. You know, it's like both. It's like, you know, you have to have a strong work ethic, and you have to do things that take up a lot of your time and energy and work really, really hard, that you need to do the self-development, personal development work on yourself. And that can start really young in the sense of, and this is, you know, whatever it is for you. For some people are interested in astrology, numerology, understanding. They're like, you know, a lot of us, it's like, when I got older, I realized that I had carried traits on from my parents that at the time they were on a pedestal, and I was like, you guys are flawless, like the most amazing humans I've ever created. And then you get older and you're like, oh shit. You have flaws, man. That's good to start to understand that, because you will definitely have picked up conditioning or genetic traits from these people around you, and just knowing that and starting to understand that as a younger person is very important.
That is so powerful.
Yeah.
That's like huge. So big.
It's scary though.
And it's only something you do when you realize when you do the work. You know, and you have you mentioned before being able to speak to people.
Yeah.
Like if you are just only having conversations with yourself and beating yourself up for why you are a certain way or why you're this, you only realize that you've probably been handed down these traits. And the only way to reverse them is like what you're saying.
Exactly. And it's that thing, it's that fine line of having accountability over who you are now, but also going, you know what, I shouldn't have been given that, mum and dad. Like, come on, guys.
And we can change it, right?
You can change it.
You can change it.
You can change anything. Nothing is set in stone. You know, everyone has the ability to grow and evolve.
I love it. What's one piece of advice for women in business?
So many. I would say that the first thing that comes to mind is that being emotional and heart-led and compassionate is actually our superpower, and that women are at the moment, or not at the moment, but maybe up until now, have been kind of like taught to almost like neglect that side of ourselves or hide it, and I think a lot of women would probably blame men for being like, oh, she's a woman, she's and it's like, let's have women, let's have accountability. And whatever reason that got us here, let's just scrap that and know that being a compassionate, heart-led nurturer, mother, whether we choose to have children or not, we are nurturers and mothers. It's like who we are. Owning that, because it is our superpower. It is what sets us apart from the men. And in our own way, it's like we women, we're like, I was taught as well to like have your seat at the table and be more direct and be this and be that. And yes, there's always your masculine and your feminine in your body that you have to manage. But for women, we always want to like I'm always in my masculine because I'm always trying to push down that emotion and that heart-led place because I've been taught that that's weak. But I would say to women in business, that is your superpower, because that is something that we have, that compassionate side, that feeling, that caring, that no one will do as well as us.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's such powerful advice. What advice would you have for someone who's just starting a business?
I would say, park your ego at the door. That's the biggest one for now, work. Hopefully you've done some self-development work, so definitely that. There's a few things, but parking your ego, being really honest with yourself, being really humble, asking everyone for all the help that you can get all the time, being persistent, and just you've started a business, now you have to work. Yeah.
It's so true. I think, as I said, I mean, like, and it's not. It's when you haven't owned a business before, I feel like, or you speak to people that haven't owned a business and then they're like, oh my God, you're doing so great. And it's like, that's just the gram. Like, you know what I mean? Like, behind the scenes, it's like, we are dying back here. You know what I mean?
You should come see what I do every day. It sucks.
Yeah, but I think you're right, 100%.
Yeah.
And the last one is, what's the most important trait that a founder must have for success and why?
Accountability. Everything is your fault. Every single thing that goes wrong in your business is on you. And owning that as quickly as possible, not blaming any. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it actually was someone. It does not matter if it was someone else that did the biggest fuck up ever. Does not matter. It is up to you to fix it. It is up to you to take that on as the founder. It is all on you at all times, which is why it's so important to do personal development, because that's a lot of stuff you have to take on that's actually not your fault, but you have to, as a founder, it's like you can't, who actually taught me that? It was Heston Blumenthal said that. And he came and he had that restaurant here, and he said that. He said, in the kitchen, every single thing that goes wrong is because of me. And I heard that when I was like 20, and it never left my side, because I was just like, that is so true, and that is so, so powerful, because he's like, I don't care. It's like, I taught that person. I empowered that person to do that. So if they got that wrong, if that didn't work, if that was this, it's because of what I set up. So having accountability is like number one.
That's so true. And that is honestly, I think, one of the most powerful pieces of advice that I think has been said on the podcast, literally. Oh. No, because you know what? It's so true, because the only way to learn is by taking responsibility.
Yes.
If the mistake may not be yours, but unless you take ownership of that, how are you meant to fix it? How are you meant to progress?
Yeah. You got to take everything on. Take it on. Like, happily take it on, because they're your learnings. Like, don't let that person have that learning and that growth. Take it from them. Be like, you made a mistake. It's actually on me. I'm going to learn from that myself. Like, that's how we succeed, is taking on every mistake. You're so right.
And that attitude spreads to the team. So if they see you doing that, that's what they embody what you do. If you push the blame, when someone makes a mistake in their team, or another colleague, that's how they're going to react as well. And it's a culture thing too.
Yeah, it is. I love being wrong. I love making mistakes. I've made so many along the way that now I'm like, it's not going to kill me. It's just going to make me stronger. And it's true. It's like so important to take it all on yourself. It's hard. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, that's the work, right? When we say the work, it's like, that's the work.
That is it, because that is a lot. You got to know who you are to be able to take that on every day, all day.
So true.
Yeah.
Erin, I want to say a massive thank you for coming on the show. I mean, such an amazing story, a lot of wisdom there, but also very excited about the next chapter. The podcast's going to be great. If today's anything to go by, there's a lot to offer there. And I love the direction that you're going into. So, a massive thank you for coming on the show. Where can people find you if they haven't, found you before? And
Yeah.
When can we look forward to some of this stuff rolling out?
Yes. So I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm kind of on TikTok, but let's just wait. Let's see how that goes. I have a website. It's all mainly on my Instagram. The podcast will come out there. You'll hear about it there. That is coming out. I'm hoping in a month I'll have a release, and book will be in spring.
Love it.
Yeah.
We'll highly recommend.
Thank you.
Johnny boy, thanks for putting this together. Erin, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Everyone who tunes in, a massive thank you to you guys as well. I really hope you enjoy the episode, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, we'll go.